We're glad to have you with us today, and we're going to review OSCON 2011 as well as look ahead to OSCON 2012 next year in Portland again, yay, and also in July. So as Catherine said, we have with us, today we're going over takeaways, trends, and highlights. And we have three of the chairs. I was also a chair, and the only chair who's missing is Bradford Stevens. So really we have a full dining room table of the people that help run and plan OSCON this year. So I'd like to introduce first Edd Dumbill. Ed?
Thanks. Good morning, everyone. It's going to be a lot of fun, I think, looking back and doing some future gazing for next year.
And next up, we have Sarah Novotny.
Good morning, or whatever time zone you happen to be. I look forward to sharing what we've all seen from OSCON.
And I should say, Sarah had the honor of chairing both OSCON and OSCON Data.
For some value of honor.
Right. And next up is Stephen Chin.
Good morning. Very pleased to be talking to you guys, and I'll be talking a little bit more about what we did with OSCON Java, which was my primary focus for this event.
Excellent. So to get on started, what were some of the biggest takeaways, Ed, that you took from OSCON this year?
Well, I was particularly happy with being able to get the topic of open science, citizen science, up on the stage. We had two keynote presenters who I was very excited to have join us, Ariel Waldman, who runs spacehack.org, and talking about how you can get involved in hacking space exploration. And what I like about that is that from the outside, this seems like such a inaccessible, broad, deep part of scientific exploration that you as an individual may not know how to get started in. But she showed us how we can all be engaged and really actually add to the effort. I think a lot of people came away incredibly inspired there. And same on the Thursday keynote, Eri Gentry showed us that we can be involved in our garages in biology and bio research. And what I think is fantastic about these subjects is that OSCON over the years has tracked a lot of these same kind of things from their infancy to becoming really important. So 3 or 4 years ago, for instance, we started up building up an open hardware track in OSCON. And there are a lot of interesting people who tinkered, but it didn't seem like anything that most people would get involved in. People with Arduino, other people with other little things. And now we're at this place where Arduino has grown up over the years, is a very, very important prototyping platform, has made hardware prototyping accessible to so many more people. And we saw the validation of that with it being adopted as a basis of Google's accessory development kit for Android earlier this year. So I'm very excited about the kind of trajectory when hackers and interested individuals can form new communities around open science and DIY biology and really get into that. I don't want to, I couldn't possibly impose myself on predicting exactly what the future is going to be there, but I know that when more and more people can form communities, have access to the tools of investigation, then great things happen.
Well, and that's one of the largest premises of open source and open hardware, right? So this idea that you own not just the box, but what you want to do with it is relatively boundless.
Exactly, and I think in the same way that open source has been a great catalyst for innovation, and particularly, that's something that OSCON Data itself will explain and talk about that. Just getting science out of beyond just the institutions and the companies that want to do, a for-profit or whatever, or otherwise constrained by funding, just opens up so much more creativity. And I feel that as well as there being the likelihood that future industries will be based on the open and hacker work that's going on in science now, I think there's a lot of scope for us as a society to benefit.
I have to say that one of my favorite bits about this is sort of the logical extension of what Ed is talking about, and that was our Geek lifestyle track, taking all the things that technologists are geeky about. And Geek was once defined by TechCrunch as the intersection between the intelligent, the obsessed, and the intersection between the intelligent and obsessed if you remove the socially inept. And I think that we really are seeing a resurgence or a surge of geek industry and geek evolution, such that we're taking the praxis that we use at work, the obsession, the programmatic thought process, the architecture, and applying it to our work or to our play as well. And so some of the things that we saw in that particular session, on top of all the science stuff which we saw on the keynote stage, we also got sessions like growing food with open source, or adventures in singing, the Geek Choir Revisited. So we saw a really broadly rounded geek at this particular event, and wanted very much to make sure that that was celebrated. I wanted to say that I thought it was sort of apropos that we had a carnival as our opening event, because the pejorative geek came out of the carnival culture, and we have embraced it and expanded it and built our own culture out of it. And I think that has been just a phenomenal evolution over the last 20 years, as we saw by this being the 13th OSCON, and we also saw on the keynote stage that it was the 20th anniversary of Linux. So we're all becoming young adults as a culture, and I think that's been really clear, especially with the crowd and the conversations that I was hearing all week.
That's a really many astute points there, Sarah. I think after sitting through the DIY gardening, what made me really just happy was the accessibility. Like open source, I think in the past was kind of considered for programmers or people with the big boxes or whatever, but now you can DIY, create your own watering system for your garden. And that's such a great way to introduce people who are not necessarily of the programming or, technology industries to understand that, no, you too really, you can do this with just a few lines of code, and you don't have to be an expert in everything to figure out the best way to actually hack into a device and create this open system that benefits you. And this is for you and something that you've custom created.
Yeah, sadly, I didn't get to go to that particular session, but I heard really good things about it. So,
Stephen, how about you? What were some of your takeaways from the conference overall?
I thought that, especially this year, and this is kind of a lead into a little bit about the open source nature of the conference. I thought it was great that we were able to bring together the whole O'Reilly open source audience, including the Java developers, folks from Apache, folks from Oracle, and actually address some of the hard questions about open source and standards in the community.
Yeah, people don't like talking about standards, right? Standards aren't sexy.
Yeah, no, we had a great presentation by Patrick Curran, who he lives standards. That's his job, and it was great to juxtapose that with folks who are entrepreneurs, innovators, and take technologies to the next level. And both are needed, and the community has the opportunity to grow in both ways, both building out the open source and innovative projects, and also participating in the shaping of standards which ultimately affect what the technologies down the road will offer them.
That's one of the fantastic parts about open source, is because it is so community-driven, even the standards end up being community-driven. So if it's not, if it's too confining, let's let's remake it. That's exactly what we did this year by adding OSCON Data and OSCON Java. We thought that, a single room, functionally a single track for databases or data was too small. We thought that a single room or track for Java was too small. So we said, let's hack the format and make it bigger and better.
Yeah, and Sarah, that's a great point. The energy was fantastic at OSCON. The number of people buzzing around, and especially the job board. It was great to see so many people looking to hire, and everyone just seemed to be definitely on the lookout to have these interesting conversations pretty much anywhere, as you're walking down the street or in on the Macs as getting to the conference. It was pretty evident who was going to OSCON, and you could just strike up a conversation with anyone. And having that buzz certainly helped really fill Portland and fill the convention center. So on to our next question here is, how has the conference and all the programming evolved over the years since the conference began? And Ed, I'm going to start with you again because I think you've been co-chairing this conference for quite a while.
4 years. Yeah. So very much, there has been quite a lot of change over the years as open source has grown up and spread. I like to think of it as following this shockwave of open as it's kind of rippled out through, starting from really Unix-like systems and the tools around there and the Richard Stallman's work and kind of rippled out. And, obviously this year we're talking about it rippling out into science and biology and lifestyle as much as programming languages. A few years ago, and I think there has been a sea change in the last 3 years at OSCON. We were very much the tribe of the languages that begin with P, Perl, Python, and PHP, and we all come together. As Andy says in the chat room, the Perl conference was actually the genesis of the open source conference in the first place, and there's still a very strong Perl core. But now we're seeing these people being a lot more pragmatic about tool choice, that increasingly there's a heterogeneous selection of tools used for any particular job. A few years ago, we still maybe the LAMP, Linux, Apache, MySQL, Perl, PHP, or Python platform was still pretty standard for a lot of web applications and so on. The universe is a lot more complicated now. There are many more moving parts, many different structures. So we're seeing OSCON in some ways become more focused on the technical side on the things that bind programmers together, what's good technique, how to pick the right kind of tools. One of the absolute standout talks was Tom Christiansen's survey, for instance, of Unicode support across programming languages. He's a Perl guy, but he just covered all the languages. With a lot of programming language focus, particularly the emerging languages track that we have now. And because we're moving into these new models of programming, we're also seeing new programming languages emerge that are more idiomatic to the highly parallel, scalable network way in which we're coding now. So in the Java world particularly, there's Scala and there's Clojure, popular languages that are emerging that really make it much more easy to program in the kind of idioms we've evolved to. I also want to point out that over the years, different things rise up in importance. This year, we've had a huge focus on JavaScript and HTML5, and that becomes one of the primary ways in which people are shipping applications and much richer client-side functionality on the JavaScript side now. So
we were expecting
grow.
Oh. Sorry, Ed.
Sorry.
I was going to say we were expecting it to be larger, so we put it in one of the larger rooms to be even burst at the seams on that one, and that was a really fantastic treat to have that many people that were interested in it.
Yeah, and the other thing is that it's not just about the programming languages. A lot of our attendees are and our speakers are running open source communities. They are wanting to know how to get the best and manage a community. They want to know how to build businesses based on open source. And again, if they're coders, they want to know, stuff about code quality, a lot of the surrounding stuff that we're able to talk about. We're still able to bring such a rich collection of experienced open source innovators, entrepreneurs together to deliver that expertise.
Some of the feedback we've gotten in the last week and a half has been around expanding the concept of leadership within OSCON. So trying to figure out, we already have the Community Leadership Summit that is co-located on the weekend before OSCON, but also bringing in some further business leadership. We started with the IT Leadership Summit on Tuesday, and looking to add more of that sort of content, as well as all of the programmatic and thought leadership within the specific disciplines of the technologies. But we do have an incredible crowd of leaders, an incredible crowd of voices that are speaking to us about what is going on in the community, what is going on in the world, and wanting to understand how to take that outside of the, I won't say echo chamber, but the smaller open source community and try and share it more broadly with the world.
Actually, that's a good lead on for one of Allison's questions, which was, will there be more of those kind of satellite conferences or more, specific focus on particular areas, such as IDEs and the future of IDEs and compiler design?
So
actually, let me mention something, and you can follow up, Sarah.
Okay.
We actually did have a nice satellite event, and it was not on compiler design or future of IDEs, but it was not that far off. It was on JVM languages, and we had a group of folks. A lot of them were from the local community. It was actually a free event. A lot of them were conference speakers or compiler designers or folks who were intimate with the technology. And it allowed us to do a deep dive on JVM language implementations, impact on JVM language communities, how to build those up, effects on future releases of Java, how those will shape JVM languages going forward, and had a really good kind of think tank discussion on the Sunday leading up to OSCON. And I think there's a great opportunity to do events around OSCON for particular audiences like that, where you can really have more of a small conference community feel, get folks around the table and solve some hard problems. And that was happening all over the place at OSCON.
Yeah, Allison, to answer to your point, each year, specifically for OSCON, we kind of pilot a couple of ideas. The IT Leadership Summit was one of those this year. The Node.js Day was one of those this year. Last year, there was the Emerging Languages Camp, which became a full Emerging Languages track this year. But there are then also all sorts of community events and community-driven events that OSCON, especially during the Monday and Tuesday of tutorials, makes space for. So, for example, the Open Source Foundations, there's an Open Source Foundations list, and they meet up and talk about foundation business in the open source community, often at OSCON. I know that there was a meeting for the Wikimedia community talking about a markup language, if I'm remembering correctly. So we make space. The JVM Languages Summit was another satellite event, but we make space for little community sort of grassroots summit or satellite meetings if someone wants to, because this really is a meeting of the tribes, and it is sometimes the only time in a year that you get 80% of the people you want to talk to together. And so we really want to make space for those things. And I just said that publicly, so we'll be deluged next year, but we do try to support the community for those little grassroots efforts as well.
Actually, Sarah, this is a good lead-in. So, I mean, in general, the communities are obviously thriving. So what does that mean for the enterprise? Are businesses themselves taking open source more seriously?
I would say they are. I work with more and more enterprise companies that perhaps aren't jumping into the open source community as leaders, but they are understanding that so much of their infrastructure and so much of the internet itself is run on this, mythical community-based software development organization, or multiple organizations, of course, as we know. So I think that as we are growing as a community in the very broad sense, the enterprise is taking more notice of and recognizing. We have Oracle having bought Sun, having bought MySQL, for example. So on the business side of selling it, we have people that are starting to embrace Linux. We have enterprises that are embracing Linux as the operating system for, their primary data centers in so many more cases than it was 5 years ago.
Yeah, I think to add to that, something else which I saw happening at the conference, which I think is really important to the open source community, is a meeting of the minds of the corporate open source. So
Yep.
Large companies like Oracle or JBoss, or folks who have business models around open source. Those are examples from the Java community. And community folks. So we had a great session, fishball, anyone could get up and talk, but we seated with a few people from Oracle, Google, and Apache, and had a great discussion with folks from across the open source community tackling some hard issues which you would normally just not get those folks in the same room having that conversation. So I think that's really valuable for the community to move things forward, and also great entertainment for the rest of us.
Well, that's I think it's always good to see that. And Andy, I know you mentioned the Community Leadership Summit, which happened actually on Saturday and Sunday before OSCON. And one of the sessions I heard got a lot of traction was basically we work for the board, but we're not evil. And that's where a lot of the corporations kind of got together and said, yeah, we're community leader from Oracle or Microsoft or wherever, but we're trying to work with the community here. And I thought that was a really interesting segue. So actually seeing more corporate or more enterprises actually participating at OSCON was a good thing. They realized that there is this fantastic community here, and this is one of the best ways to meet with them in person. And I'm going to go ahead, Sarah.
I was going to say, you also saw some in the hallway tracks. You saw some of the tension between the communities that were being seeded by corporations, so say the OpenStack community, and some of the older school diehards that say that's not real open source if you're paying all the developers. And I got to talk with a Rackspace employee who was discussing the ways that he might help his company learn and reach out to the community and reach out to specific developers for specific help on OpenStack, and trying to find a way to bridge that gap. And I thought that was the first time I had heard that sort of direction of, instead of a top-down, but a, hey, how can we actually pull this in? How can we get more people involved? So I was really impressed by that set of questions.
Yeah, I think there's an emerging maturity with which everyone is seeing open source. Those first corporate dabbles with open source, where some of them had the air of sprinkling open source fairy dust on a bit of unloved code and hoping things will be right. But we all have a lot more appreciation for what makes an effective open source project, effective contributions. And there's still a lot of controversy and whatnot. But I saw nothing, but pretty honest and open dialogue. And I'd love Steve to comment on what the response was to Oracle at the show, because we had a pretty good Oracle support for the Java conference in particular, and it's fair to say that they came into that not without some degree of controversy, some degree of annoyance in the community in general. And I'd love to hear how that panned out, whether there was harmony and honest discussion, or whether it was more arm's length.
Yeah, that's a good question, Ed. And I think the tone was really set by Steve Harris's keynote presentation. He put this great picture, kind of a mocking picture of different corporate structures, and Apple, Microsoft, and in the Oracle box, the corporate structure had a huge, giant organization of legal, lots of lawyers and lots of people pulling strings, and a little tiny development organization being pulled around by those guys. And yeah, that's somewhat of a parody of their organization. They really don't have more legal people than developers, I would hope.
Yeah, that was a great comic. I saw it as well on the web.
Yeah, I'm posting it to the chat room if you guys have missed it as well. Well, Steve, actually, while we have you here, why don't you go ahead and lead us right into your overall observations of OSCON Java?
Yeah, sure. Let me finish the thought around Steve Harris. I think that'll lead in nicely. So I think that set the tone, because really his message to the community was, we screwed up. We took over the technology. We didn't properly address and work with the community. And they understand that, but they're working to get things better. And at the conference, we actually had all the folks who are key drivers behind the Java 7 release giving talks, and also addressing questions the audience had about the Java 7 release, which happened during the OSCON Java conference. And the great thing about that is this is something which Sun had wanted to do for a number of years. We all know and love Sun for their great work with the community, but they were not really good at getting releases out. It had been about 5 years since the last major Java release, which in development years is several lifetimes of us. So actually driving forward the technology, and Oracle has a business need for the technology. They understand they need to work better with the community, and they were open in addressing that. Those are concerns. They sat on a panel with Apache. One of the big elephants in the room was about the Java community process, about the legal issues surrounding the Java IP. And they were willing to actually bring stuff to the table and talk about it and be open and honest about their positions and why they take in different positions. And I think that's part of what you need to bring out, is get people to the table, get folks talking about issues that matter. And this was a great conference setting for that, because not being an Oracle conference, not being any particular party's events, we were able to bring people to the table who you'd normally never see. So another great thing about OSCON Java is we had Josh Block keynoting the event, and it was great to see him on the stage. He did some excellent, one of the puzzler talks with Bob Lee was really great, and also
Steve,
kind of the good, the bad, and the ugly on Java.
And that's Josh Block from Google, and then Bob Lee was formerly at Google and is now at Square.
Yeah, and those are great guys. For anyone who missed seeing them last year when Google pulled out of other events, this was a great chance to see those guys back on the floor. And it was one of the things which I really wanted to make the conference feel like is I get the opportunity to go to conferences around the world, a lot of them community-driven, and the best thing for me from an attendee standpoint is having access to the speakers, having a small conference feel where you can just walk up to folks, start conversations. You might be sitting in a room watching a presentation next to Martin Odersky, who's the author of Scala, or Steve Harris from Oracle, and those guys were around the conference, accessible, and we even had specific sessions. We tried an experiment this year with a small hacker session where we essentially paired up Java 7 experts and speakers one-on-one with attendees to work through and actually make a difference by converting some real open source software to take advantage of the new Java 7 features. And I think those sort of things are things which attendees remember and are really impactful when you go to a conference. there anything else you wanted to add, Laurel? Any of your thoughts about the OSCON Java?
No, I think those are really great observations, and one of the great opportunities that OSCON actually provides is that space where people actually come and stay for the whole week. You don't get that feeling that people are just kind of parachuting in and then taking off after their session or keynote. Ed and Sarah, what do you see for that? It seems people definitely stick around and they want to really hang out with the community, and that's part of the feel of OSCON, and people really get that feeling kind of coming home year after year and seeing some people who are new, but then also a lot of the same people that participate every year.
Yeah, one phrase we've always applied to OSCON is the gathering of the tribes. And I know when you get all those people together, we are like a big family, fighting, but and laughing with each other, but definitely all one family. I can honestly say that when we get together and we get up on stage, just the feeling of this is my people and we're all together is pretty amazing. It's certainly, if I can speak for the O'Reilly team, I know that out of all the conferences we do each year, OSCON is definitely the team's favorite because it does feel like meeting and being with our longest, oldest extended family.
And then the extended family just keeps getting bigger. And Sarah, you mentioned OSCON Data. So how is that this year? I mean, we're seeing, obviously, there were some people that are familiar to OSCON, but now they're in the separate kind of data track or completely different data conference. So what were some of the highlights there?
Sure, I'd be happy to talk about that. I don't necessarily think that I think that most people wanted to feel more a part of OSCON itself. So I don't think that anybody thought that they were, supposed to be separate. In fact, lots and lots of people asked, maybe next year we can lay it out so that everything is closer. Now, of course, that would be magic if we got more rooms on one end of the OCC. But within OSCON Data, we knew that the explosion of data as a business tool and its business intelligence, large-scale enterprises have known this forever. I mean, Walmart is known for their data warehouse and has been known for that for 15 years, and being able to predict what they need when and having just-in-time delivery. But what we're seeing is more and more capture of all sorts of data, such as the accelerometer data from your phone, or it's not just Visa and MasterCard that are being given all sorts of consumer information at this point. So we really had to take a look at this plethora of data and then all of the tools and all of the infrastructure surrounding it, and being able to even split that out was really an interesting challenge, because you would have people that were interested in databases and NoSQL work that might not particularly be interested in the visualization side. So it was, again, very much the meeting of the tribes, even within data. So we saw a lot of content about Hadoop and NoSQL solutions, and then there was also the real-time and the streaming sessions were fantastic, and they are the future. I mean, we are streaming data in what is known as a great big data exhaust plume behind us every which way we go. And the more people and companies and organizations can look at what data we're using, the better they will be able to serve our needs. Now, that's a whole separate argument as far as the privacy side, but we are definitely seeing a growth of lots and lots of data and trying to figure out how to wrap our arms around it. I think the biggest thing that I got out of OSCON Data was this is new. This is very much bloody edge, and trying to figure out how to adjust, use it, make tools, make decisions, and grow that community and that as a praxis, as a open source practice even, is really important. We're finding that a DBA is not just a DBA anymore. We are data storage engineers, and that is not just for a relational database. We're seeing the rise again of key value stores. I mean, the file system. In one of the Ignite talks, Mark Atwood described a new fancy NoSQL key value store, which was a file system. And so we're seeing the resurgence, and we're kind of seeing the backlash against relational databases in how to access data. It's not only relational. Not everything needs to go into a database. So we're finding all sorts of really, really broad trends and really good thoughts and conversations in this space. O'Reilly actually is doing, and Ed are doing Strata here in a couple of weeks, and that's more from the application layer, and we saw OSCON Data as the infrastructure layer. So we were really looking at what is holding the data, what are the nuts and bolts that we're gluing it together with. And I think that people took away a lot of broadening topics and interests out of it.
Oh, that's great, Sarah. And also, one of my favorite moments was, if anyone hasn't had the chance to see it yet, was Steve Yagi on stage, and he works at Google.
Oh, yep.
And yeah, his big takeaway was, this is all great. We're all working on really fantastic, really important things, which actually he pretty much clumped into a category of online cat pictures. So his point was that we need to still work on stuff that matters. And data, big data, obviously matters. But, it matters more when we're talking, well, I guess it's a judgment call, but some would say it would matter more when you're talking about, crunching numbers for medical
the Human Genome Project.
Human Genome Project, right, versus maybe lolcats. So what about that? Like, do you feel that there's also that energy there in the data space, especially, we're not just here to kind of, and Ed, please jump in too, we're not just here to call ourselves data analytic scientists. We're here to actually change the world, or how we see it, how we interpret the world.
Well, we can't all eat candy all the time, and I think people got a taste for what data can do through the candy, and now we are recognizing the ways that this works. More broadly, we're recognizing the way that this can improve everything through science, through the number crunching that didn't ever used to be possible. I mean, one of our open source award winners, Fabrice Bayard, computed pi to like 2,700, I don't remember the number, 2,700 million digits, something absolutely insane. And that was done on a desktop computer. 5 years ago, that wouldn't have been possible. 50 years ago, you wouldn't have had, toggle switches that could handle that. But even 15 years ago, you would have had to talk to Cray to do that. There's all sorts of compute and analysis that is giving us opportunities to improve the world. And while we did find our way to this through candy, I think that there's still plenty of vegetables, if you'll forgive the open source gardening references, for us to learn and enjoy and move forward with.
Great. Ed, do you have any points on the kind of O'Reilly's ideas? One of Steve Yagi's points in his presentation is work on stuff that matters, and that is a tenement that's definitely key to a lot of O'Reilly's thinking, but this big data as well, and kind of why are we paying attention to this, and what is the importance?
Absolutely, and what I think the defining thing is for me personally is that computers ought to serve us, right? That in a sense, a lot of computing history, and particularly, I would say, closed source, mass market, corporate-driven model of computing is this kind of economy of scale where you produce a program and it has to be a certain way, and then you train your humans to behave like the computer wants to. File system and email, things like that have turned us into a race of glorified filing clerks. Sort of fitting ourselves into the way that the computer says we must work, because that's how much they can afford to engineer. We can't look inside and improve it, and so on. So open source source is very, very, very important in giving us the ability to change that environment, to change the software to work in the way that we want it to help us and kind of reverse this power thing and hopefully ensure that computers serve humanity. And I think with what's happening in big data is essentially the democratization that we got with open source is coming to the data sphere. 5 years ago, the only people who crunched massive amounts of data to get insight were either Google, who really led the way with cheap computing in that format, or Walmart, who had scads of cash and can afford the large data warehousing infrastructure. They used it to optimize their business. Well, now pretty much anybody can get a hold of a whole cluster of Hadoop or whatnot and start using data to improve whatever they're interested in. So I see what's happening in data as a natural, and particularly the open source projects such as Hadoop that give democratized access to data crunching as this part of this flow that we started with the beginning of the open source movement. It's very important that computers should serve humans rather than humans serving computers.
So next year we can definitely plan to see more data sessions and a focus on that as it evolves in the open source world as well.
Absolutely. As a conference, we track the frameworks and the computing paradigms in which technology is moving as much as anything else. But I would love to see. I'm going to be intrigued to see how we carry on. Open source has definitely underpinned a lot of the data infrastructure that the people are starting to make money off, in the same way that Apache, underpinned. And Mozilla underpinned Web and Web 2.0 and so on. But I'm particularly interested in where are the cool things, right? Where is it that people are using open source to gain an unfair advantage to really disrupt and turn around a situation, and particularly where that helps society and helps us? Yeah,
and while you're here, I'm going to ask you, actually, what was your most favorite presentation or speaker from OSCON this year? I mean, there was so many to choose from, and it was hard to be in so many places at any given time. And the data sessions were just as fantastic as the Java and, of course, the standard OSCON sessions. But was there a certain area that you really wished you had more time to spend?
Well, as a chair, it's no secret that you don't really get much time to go into each of the talks, because you're on stage in the morning and walking around and frazzled. So I'm going to cheat on that and say that what I loved were Ariel Waldman, Eri Gentry, and Karen Sandler and their keynotes, because they told different stories of the importance of open source to fields that we weren't that familiar with, space exploration, biology, and medical devices. And furthermore, what was brilliant about it, it was told through the lens of their personal story. And a lot of us, and particularly the more corporate among us, can get up and kind of talk in white paperese, but these talks are all very real and from personal experience. Same with Steve Yegge, and so that's what I valued most.
That's a good point you just mentioned. I mean, those are 3 female keynote speakers, and I was at the Women in Tech luncheon as well, and we had quite a few tables, more than we did last year. And I was wondering, that was fairly intentional, right? I saw lots of women at OSCON this year.
Well, I would say that was very intentional.
Yeah.
The keynote particularly. Sorry, go ahead.
Let me ramble on, sorry. It's an ongoing thing for us that we want to, incorporate as much gender balance as we can, and it's also not a secret that this isn't easy to do in open source and in tech. We've been thinking about it for a while at O'Reilly, and try our best and always try to outreach and be in discussion. I'm just happy to see interesting people with challenging things to say.
Oh, yes. I mean, that's the goal of chairs everywhere. Sarah, how about you? What was one of your favorite presentations or sessions or just themes and ideas?
So as far as a meme and idea, because I'm going to have to sort of cop out a little bit and say that most of the sessions I saw were the keynotes because of some associated work. But the favorite theme and idea that I heard was as always, more and more talk about the community and how to involve the community and how to engage the community and how to grow your community and how to guide and lead a community. So again and again, even as I had mentioned earlier, from the corporations that were understanding sort of their place, their at least slightly humbled place in this architecture, and starting to find out how they can fit and how they cannot be shunned. We actually saw what was the least marketing keynote I've ever seen from Microsoft, from Gianluca Robolino. And that was, I think, a really big step for Microsoft to say, yeah, we actually have to start thinking about meeting you where you are. But my two favorites for the keynotes were actually Brian Fitzpatrick talking about the data liberation front and the fact that Google is very much about this is your data, so if you want it out, here are the tools. It's not even you can have it, it's complicated. It's let's make it simple for you to have it out. And then my second favorite was, speaking of how there's all sorts of candy as well at these events sometimes, my other favorite was Paul Fenwick's closing keynote about our wetware and how we are not always and very often not even realizing why we do things. And I thought that was really illuminating and as always, given with a great amount of panache.
That's fantastic. And Steve, how about you?
So this is a hard question because if you could have taken the cream of the crop of all the Java speakers across the world, we pretty much got some of the best folks in the industry out to talk to us. But a couple of talks that I think are worth really highlighting. One was a great talk by Rafi from Twitter, who really, we had a big focus on JVM languages, and if you're in the Java community, it's a natural fit to move to a language which offers some more modern programming features. But he hit it from the opposite angle as a real case study for a company which started with Ruby on Rails, was extremely happy with the technology and how they were able to advance their platform with it, but at scale hit issues, and now they're actually looking at re-implementing portions of their stack on the JVM. And I think showing real data about throughput and events and the business decision behind why they decide to move to Java for their event bus and some other key components is a really interesting case study. And he had a very humorous style and was able to put it to the audience in a way where everyone could really grasp why they made the decisions and why they're moving to languages like Scala and Clojure. And the other presentation, which I think laid a groundwork and a framework for where Java is and where it's going, was Josh Bloch's presentation on Java, the good, the bad, the ugly. And it was really nice to see somebody who had been with it from the beginning. He could effectively look back at the years of Java, the design decisions made up front, and for in his longer technical session, actually went release by release, feature by feature, annotations, generics, all little features which have been added to Java over the years, and was able to do extremely accurate summations of kind of the effect and whether it was a good idea, the effect on the language for each of those, and also did a forward-looking forward-looking view at some of the Java 7 features for what he thought might happen with those, with the caution that he's rarely good at predicting things. So we really have to wait and see how Java 7's received and what sort of things people apply it towards, especially with all the new coin language features and changes, some of which actually help JVM languages. So I think there was quite a lot of great presentations by folks, and those were two which were particularly relevant to JVM languages, a driving force behind that, and where the Java language has been and where it's going.
Yeah. No, and we certainly have heard from people at the conference itself, and obviously here on the webcast, that the divisions of OSCON Data and Java with the standard programming was a bit confusing at first, but that's one of the things that we are looking at for feedback. And I'm trying to think, what other feedback would people like to give, or Ed and Sarah and Steve, and what are you hearing? Another one was a good one here was the BOF sessions. Again, always a popular feature at OSCON, but perhaps they need to be somehow brought into the daylight almost, with dedicated sessions at lunch for people getting together around certain topic areas. Again, we brought back those tags on the badges, so you could actually kind of show people what you were interested in talking about, whether it was Python or Java or Perl. And I think that's a great point, but it's kind of funny to kind of still go up to someone and say, "Hi, I like Perl too. I have this Perl ribbon." So, Ed, what are you seeing on that, kind of gathering the tribes, I guess, in smaller, more informal groupings?
Yeah, well, one of the things I just suggested in the chat room is that I would also like to do tagged tables at lunch, so you can just find a lunch table with your topic on it to go and find people. I think that is one of the most difficult things at an event the size of OSCON, is locating, fellow travelers in your particular area. And, each year as well, we try to highlight in the program some kind of communities and draw them together. Last year we had quite a lot of love for the Python world, and we had a little evening soiree for them. This year, and also the Scala event, this year we've been gathering around Node.js, which had a day of its own. We want to help communities find each other, and particularly for emerging and newsworthy technologies that people want to find a lot about, try and link up the experts and the experienced people with those who are interested.
Yeah, and what about next year? What are you thinking about next year program?
You know what? Next year I would die to have Rich Hickey give a keynote on stage. I keep trying to get him, and hopefully 2012 will be the year. For those who don't know, he is the inventor of the Clojure programming language, and one of the most intelligent, considered, and warm people when talking about programming language design. I heartily recommend going to find some of his lectures online and listening to them.
Oh, that's fantastic. Sarah, how about you? What kind of feedback are you hearing?
On top of how to, we've kind of heard mixed feedback on how to bring together kind of the smaller tribes as well. So how can Python people find Python people? But we've also heard feedback on how to get and encourage people to mingle cross-tribe. So that one is an interesting one, as well as some of the feedback I mentioned earlier, trying to bring in more leadership, and that leadership being, potentially figuring out how to grow in a technical leadership position or in a thought leadership position and community leadership positions as well. So trying to bring in more of essentially the growth path that is not strictly technical for people and for businesses that are more career. So how to career-focused as well as the programmatic work, because we have lots and lots of people working really well on the programmatic side and the technological side and the operational side, but also giving the geeks a little bit more of the buff and polish that they often need when interfacing with the rest of the world. So giving a lot more of that attention, I think, is something that I'm going to look forward to next year.
I saw a tweet go by, something like, it looks like OSCON's grown up a bit because I see more khakis than kilts. So do we expect to see more of that next year, the leadership seminars and how to run your own startup and that kind of
See, I'd rather see more kilts in the enterprise myself. So I'm taking my Converses out to enterprise regularly, and I'm trying very much to blend in a way that is still very open source and very me, but not bowing. So I'm all for bringing the kilts to the enterprise as opposed to the khakis to OSCON.
Ed, quickly, any other things you're looking forward to in 2012?
Well, all of it, really. I think I love the challenge of putting OSCON together and to try and bring the right mix. I look forward to getting deeper into some of the lifestyle issues, some of the both personal management and personal productivity and code management and team management issues. I'm hearing
they go
a lot.
Hand.
Yeah, exactly. It's a holistic thing, and I think it's one of the great things about OSCON is that if no other time in the year we can celebrate being 24-hour geek there and everything that means. On a topic level, I'm hearing loud and clear that Python was bigger than we expected it to be this year. We didn't either have enough room in the rooms or we'd see a name tag. Subject tags. So it's great to see more Python there, and I'd love to have more personal interaction with Python folks as to what we should cover. As it's an interesting technology because it's so broadly adopted. Zeroing in on what to cover in the space of 10, 12 sessions is also difficult.
Right. And I'm sure we'll see all that and more. And, of course, you want to submit your Python proposals to OSCON next year or any other proposal. The call for proposals will open, as it does every year, in the late fall, so look around November or so. And we're looking forward to a fantastic OSCON 2012 next year. Again, it's going to be in Portland, July 16th through the 20th. And I did notice that people were double-checking the schedules, and in 2012 it won't be concurrent with the Oregon Beer Festival, unfortunately. But that's just one of the many offerings that Portland does have to offer, and OSCON in general. And I think we're going to see just another enormous event with too many sessions that you just can't possibly choose which one to go to. And I want to thank Ed and Steve and Sarah for joining me today to talk about OSCON, as well as everyone who has participated in the chat room. And it was a really great chat, so hopefully we were able to shed some light on a fantastic OSCON it was this year.